So, nightmares and bad dreams aren't anything new for anyone, especially nowadays, how the world tends to be going. But, while growing up, I'd regularly freak out my parents, or wake them up in the middle of the night with one problem or another. Usually, it'd be a bloody nose, and oddly enough, if I ever have one, it's always my left nostril. While in grade school, I hated the windows in my bedroom at night and would always be trying to lock them. Eventually, my folks told me that I need to keep them clear in case of a fire and needed another exit. So, instead, I ended up nailing the curtains shut, figuring if it was bad enough and I had to get out, I could tear them free. Anytime vehicle lights passed by the curtains, the hairs on the back of my neck would stand up, let alone any light that didn't make sense. To try and help get over my phobia, my mother would rarely wait until about dusk and try to talk through the window. Hysterics usually followed. It was never just a solid bright white light either. Generally, when the terrifying to curious light came in, it flowed like water of that of a tendril, like from the movie Abyss, when the water was exploring around the deep sea station. However, it was like prismatic dots that moved as one, dancing around the inside of my room, like an aurora borealis. But the lights didn't shine out onto nearby things. They did not reflect off glass or radiate on the walls or ceilings. I'd even greet the dancing light sometimes. "Hi guys," is what still comes to memory. While this sounds lighthearted, the feeling of having my covers ripped off my body in the middle of the night, followed by knowing there was something, not just in my room, but looming close, still gives me a cold pang of fear. Those nights didn't have dazzling light shows, but rather darkness and the looming sense of something or someone just within arm's reach. Thankfully, I am a so-called experiencer. I think any memories of procedures or being in a ship seems like vacant holes or perhaps covered for my own good. Generally, my memories are before or after potential abductions. After moving from my childhood home and into a duplex during high school, two other types of possible dreams events immediately come to mind. On one end, once more lighthearted, I was jumping in my front yard, but the dream-like feel to it was similar to Willy Wonka, where one would be floating upwards. I'd reach out, grab a branch to the tree in my front yard, and drift there for a moment before using the leverage to bound back towards the ground, over and over, until the pulling light in the sky seemed to have playtime be over, and finally pulled me in a few branches upwards. Generally, when these types of things happened, I blacked out, the instant that joy turned to fear, or the top of the tree rushed by as I went flying upwards. Thankfully, no leaves or branches were in my bed the next morning, though there were scratches up and down my arms, as if I'd been wrestling with a bush. The worst was what most experienced as possible sleep paralysis. Muscles locked, breath quickened, and a general dread of fear. Shadowy figures moving around and giving a sense before or after when they came or when leaving. A visual overload of a tie-dye or kaleidoscope of colors. A few times, my visual senses got overloaded, where newspaper headlines and various articles flooded and flashed, overlapping each other within my sight. I don't know if it was a warning, or perhaps brain regurgitating something I picked up that was trying to connect the dots. Now, truth be told, I've always been a fairly straight-edged guy. Never even tried psychedelics or any hallucinogenic drugs. The worst drug I'll ever do is a three-way tie between beer, cigarettes, and pot. However, I've never seen anything from those substances, and the marijuana and beer has only been recreationally used in recent years since my experiences have all but tapered off. I do have more odd moments with the paranormal and unexplained, but each I've tried to reason away. Just these memories seem to match some of the stories I've heard. I've been wanting to write this email for quite some time. Growing up, my family and I have had frequent visitations from what we call the translucent man, going back to all the way when my mother was just a little girl. Their family would have frequent visitations from this being. They're not really sure if it's demonic or if it's possibly an alien. We're not exactly sure. But the very first time was when my mother was around 7 years old. She was outside, playing with her horses. It was around evening time, and her mother and father were getting things cleaned up outside. I should note that these weren't actual horses. They were toy horses, just to clear that up. And as her parents are going in and out of the house, my mother, only being a little girl at the time, looks over towards the woods and sees this weird being coming towards her. She had never seen anything like it before, and did not feel immediate fear, but more curiosity. Her father was the next to see it. As he's stepping out of the house, looks up, sees it, begins screaming and panicking, grabs his daughter, aka my mom, pulls her in the house, and locks the door, waits for this thing to disappear. As my mother got older, the movie The Predator came out. I'm sure you've seen it. It's one of the most popular from the 1980s, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And there are several scenes in that movie where this predator creature takes on this camouflage, where it almost has this translucent rainbow outline, if that makes any sense. As it's cloaked, it's like the time and space around it is warped, creating almost a translucent, weird warped outline. She said that this translucent man was nearly the exact same, just in the shape of a humanoid figure, but with that same translucent, time-warped space around it being bent shape. And shortly after this being began paying almost weekly visits to their house and surrounding land. This is ultimately what confused my mother and her parents, because it never acted aggressive. It never tried to break into the house. In fact, it never even got close to the house, actually. Like you hear in some stories, beings seem pretty hostile, looking in the windows, rattling the doors, trying to break in. But this always kept its distance. But my mother, she just feels like it was lured to us, lured to the house for some reason. She's not sure. After seeing it so many times and knowing it wasn't going to hurt her or them, she kind of just became desensitized to it, if you will. And then about 14 years of age, nearly 7 years later, for whatever reason, they just randomly stopped seeing it all of a sudden. Until she got to about 18, 19, when this thing started appearing again, shortly after she had gotten married. Oh, I should include this, that my mother and father got married at 18, high school sweethearts, and they are still together to this day, almost 30 years later. It seems as though that once my mother and father became wedded and got pregnant with my oldest sister, things skyrocketed as far as frequency of encounters and sightings, even seeing multiple of these translucent men following all around their house, where we used to live when I was very little. And at this time, my grandparents had no longer had any more sightings. Whatever this translucent man was, he seemed very fixated on my mother and has never quite left her alone. Before I get to present day, let me finish with what was going on. So my eldest sister is born, then I'm born, then my younger brother is born, all within the span of 7 years. All the while, sightings are frequent, but the behavior of this thing and these things is the same as when my mother was a child. Not aggressive at all, just curious, almost like it was watching my mother, watching over her, but from a distance. And obviously at this point, my father had had the chance to see this thing many times, and he too felt that this thing didn't pose a threat at all to our family, and I'm sure at one point or another even considered it a guardian angel, although I feel like that's a pretty far-fetched theory. I guess I could see why he would think that. Then, something crazy had happened. I was probably about 9 or 8, sometime in that range, and my mother, I kid you not, literally vanished for 10 days. Nobody knew where she was. In fact, my father had a nervous breakdown, thinking she had been kidnapped and was now human trafficked, or worse, dead. We all had just woken up one morning, and she was gone. Nowhere to be found. No traces of her. The police got involved and nothing. It was impossible that she would go anywhere. All of her belongings were left in the house. Her clothes, nothing. The car was still here. There was no reason as to why she had just simply vanished. But then, on the 10th day, she appeared randomly at the edge of where our land starts, in foreign clothes we had never seen her in. They were weird. They were like loose gray and white robes, and she kept telling us everything would be okay, that she was fine. And between being overwhelmed with emotion and hysterics, we kept trying to pull it out of her. Where was she? What happened to her? Why was she in these strange clothes we had never seen her in? She just kept recalling that she really couldn't remember, that the last thing she knows is she was lying in bed, and said this bright white light from the ceiling kind of engulfed her, and that was it. Then the next thing she knows, she's standing in this field, right outside where our house is. Couldn't even believe it had been 10 days either. She was pretty convinced it was all just a dream. I really don't know or have any evidence to point that these translucent beings had anything at all to do with my mother's disappearance for 10 days, but it certainly makes you wonder, because directly after this, there's sightings of them being around our house, really amped up. For about the next 8 or 9 months, actually, we would all see them just about every other day, kind of just wading through the field, all around our house, day and night. There were moments that I'm not going to lie, it got annoying and pretty creepy. But this behavior continued on, to about the time I was about 18, 19, and moved out for college. A few years afterwards, the sightings have dwindled, and I guess the activity really kind of went down after I was out, and my sister and brother were also moved out too. As time has gone on, I'm 34 now, and my oldest sister is 37. My little brother is 30. My parents do not live in that house anymore, the one where my mother went missing. They have since moved since I have lived and moved out of high school. And since then, they have not had any more sightings or strange experiences with these translucent beings, these invisible outline humanoid figures. I, nor my siblings, have not seen them either, around the house, around our houses, or even in our dreams, nor has anybody been abducted, taken, or had any strange experiences dealing with the paranormal, or in this world that we can't quite explain. So, call it a paranormal experience, call it an alien experience. I'm not exactly sure what we dealt with, but I can confidently say it did happen, and it is by far the strangest thing I and my family have ever dealt with.